this is what it costs to like live the life or work the work that I want to work. And to also know that it gets better, or it can.
Welcome to the Work Undone podcast, a show where I sit down with maker entrepreneurs to find out what it really takes to start a business focused on physical product from the folks who are actually in the thick of it. I'm your host, Justin Hawkins, a designer, artist, entrepreneur, living in lovely Portland, Oregon. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for joining me at episode 1 here. Also, I just want to say I'm new to this, and I'm recording here in my studio's workspace. There's going to be a train that'll probably go by every once in a while and make itself known. I've got makers on either side of me banging around and making things happen. And though my setup's pretty decent here, you'll still hear some table knocking and glasses banging around a little bit and paper shuffling. But overall, there's a really good chance you're not even going to notice it. On this episode, my good friend Agnieszka, the owner and solopreneur of Oru, an amazing jewelry company featuring a unique weaving technique using Japanese glass beads. Before we get started, I just want to let you know I cut in a few times here in the episode to clarify a few things that we got mixed up on our chat. So without further ado, here we are at episode 1. Thanks so much for sitting down and having a conversation with me.
That is amazing. It's totally my pleasure. It's like I've known you for like 2 years plus, and I remember like the first time we actually had a chance to like sit and connect. It was like about this idea, so it feels like really exciting to be like here with you, like part of this materialization of this thing that you've been brewing in your mind for years now.
It has been brewing for a while, and I'm excited. I'm actually finally sitting down to do it. So let's just start out. Tell us how to pronounce your name. First and last, because, it's a hard one to read.
Yeah, totally. It's Agnieszka Zotowski.
Zoltowski, okay.
Yeah.
I do remember it took me a while to get that one down.
Me too.
So.
It's cool.
You too? Nice.
Yeah, imagine kindergarten. How do you spell it? What?
Yeah, I bet. So my first question, I want to just start out kind of getting an overview of kind of your history, like creatively. Where did you come from? Like maybe start with where you lived, where you grew up, and any creativity in there, and then any entrepreneurial sort of experiences or examples you had in your life?
Yeah, totally. Well, I grew up in a suburb of Seattle, and as the name might suggest, I was born to 2 Polish immigrants. And they are the ones that actually like started me on the path to creativity. My mom was a lawyer in Poland. But when she moved to the States, she obviously had to like leave that behind, and she ended up like studying graphic design in Santa Barbara, where she moved to meet my father. And then my dad, even like as he was growing up, like as a child, he would go to like the Palace of Culture in Warsaw to like take painting classes and like woodworking classes and all this stuff. Like, his entire childhood really like was fairly challenging, but he found a lot of joy and like in that creative, exploration. And so that they've always been like that basically. And then as I was growing up, my mom was doing some graphic design, and my dad was working on actually antique restoration. So, when I think I was like 13 or 14, he actually quit his job to run the business full time. He was running it out of the house. And so he was doing antique restoration. My mom was doing fine art restoration. So, I was like in this environment of like entrepreneurship, small business, creativity, craftsmanship, my whole life. And wow. Even like in the design of the house, like there was like this huge influence of like Denmark, like mid-century modern to even like later on, like more like the contemporary, like at the time, like 80s and 90s, like, Scandinavian style. So that also I'm sure has played an influence. And then my whole life, my dad was always giving me like little like pieces to play with. Like we would when I was younger, we would like build paper like castles together, or like every Friday when he came home from work, he would bring me like a piece of like Fimo clay, or like a stamp, or a bag of beads, or whatever he knew I was interested in at the time. Like he would always, like, no matter how financially challenging the times were, he would always have something for me and feed that. And it was funny because like when I was younger, I never fully appreciated it or was aware of like what I was receiving, because I was like, Dad, why won't you play soccer with me? But I was like getting all of this amazing like support in the maker, creativity, design world from both of my parents.
Wow, that's a lot. That's great.
Right.
That seems like an awesome environment to grow up in.
Yeah.
It speaks a lot to where you're at now. So, tell us a little bit about some of the businesses you have tried to make in the past or have created in the past, and how you got to, starting this business.
Well, I feel like that kind of like entrepreneurial spirit has always been in me somewhere. And so even when I was younger, like, and really getting into jewelry, it was like, first it was like hemp necklaces. And I would like sell those on like the pier steps in Seattle. Or like when I was 16, I like sold jewelry in like a shop. And it was like, little crystal wire wrapped, whatever, but it was just like this thing that I had to do. And it wasn't even like so much I was like doing it for like money or like for pieces that I wanted to wear. It was like because I just needed to be making. So fast forward 10, 15 years or so, I was attending Oregon College of Art and Craft and Metals, and after that I kind of started a jewelry company called Appleseed Design, but I didn't have like the skill set to like make that a viable full-time business for myself.
Which skill set?
Business. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like just how to run a business. I didn't have it. And so like while I knew how to make jewelry and like I had like some sales skills, so like I can make relationships with shops and all of that, I didn't understand how to price it. I didn't understand how to market it. And so I think I got a little disappointed and kind of let that go, because up until that point, or even beyond that, anytime I was selling the jewelry, it was like a side thing. And even in undergrad, I studied something completely different, because I never thought that like I could make jewelry more than just a side thing that I really loved. But
what did you study?
I studied art history and French language and literature, like a nerd.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I fell in love with like French literature when I lived in Paris my junior year abroad. And initially I was slated to be just an art history major. And at that point I was like, I need to do both. So I ended up staying an extra semester in my undergrad college to complete that, because I was just smitten. But I didn't really have the foresight to be like, okay, you can basically just be a professor with this type of degree. But that's okay. That's informed a lot of who I am, and no regrets. But yeah, back to the question about the business. So it really, I started my first like real like I'm gonna do this business, and it was a raw vegan food company. So I was introduced to raw vegan food I think in like 2008, somewhere around there. At any rate, shortly thereafter, I was like, I'm gonna save the world. I'm gonna start this like raw vegan food business. I'm gonna like feed everybody salad. It's gonna be organic, and the world is gonna be a better place. Because at the time I was like working downtown, and like I saw all these like angry people. Like I had a lot of angry customers, not because of me or what I was doing. It was just like the energy. And I really believed at the time that like food could heal all of that. And like at this point in my life, and having gone through all that, I've learned that it's more complicated, that food plays a part, but that's not the answer. But I needed to go through that path to learn that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I started that business, and my first day I showed up at like the Beaverton Farmers Market with this like adorable handmade cart with an umbrella that my father had made, and like no idea how to price anything, no experience in like food production. And I was just like, I'm here, I'm passionate about this, and I'm gonna do it. And like the first year was just like me losing money. Like it was just like ridiculous. But eventually, like, I started learning, talking to other people, and kind of like picking up these little clues on like, maybe you can price this way, or if you're more efficient in the kitchen, like you won't be working 70 hours a week and burning yourself out. And then like after about 2 years, I ended up taking like a business class through like Mercy Corps, and that was like helpful. Like I had already like made the business make a little bit more sense, but that helped me see the light a little bit more and ask myself the right questions. And then so I just continued doing it until I couldn't do it anymore. Food production, food service is like a really challenging career choice, and especially when it's raw vegan, it's super perishable. You get up at 4, you deliver to the shops at 10, and then you go back and like work some more to prepare for the next day. And it was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I also realized that people need to learn how to feed themselves. So I moved on. Yeah. So that's like, I think that's it.
So then that segues really well into my next question, which is explain your current business and how you got started doing it. Yeah.
Well, let's see. Okay. So I make jewelry that is like minimalist, using cast metal and hand-woven Japanese glass beads. The name of the company is Oru, and it's the Japanese word for to weave. I started there's like so many like start dates that you could count, but we could start with saying like when I signed a lease for a studio at Tone Storage where we met.
Right.
And that was in January of 2014. So that could be one start date. Another start, but like there was never really like a collection yet. There were like some pieces floating out there, but nothing crystallized. And then, or it could be from the day that I was laid off. That was Valentine's Day 2014, 6 weeks after signing a lease for a studio. And it was just like the universe going like, sink or swim, girl. This is what you wanted. Here it is. Wow. And so like that was the opportunity to like say yes and really go for it. So I did. I invested like my full attention to the business, and by August there was a full collection out in the world. So that so you can count any of those days. It's like the official start of Oru.
Yeah. Well, it's always really exciting to see somebody follow somebody and see them, get to this path of success. And while it might not feel like it on your end, I didn't realize, but to see and watch you grow and your product grow and, be there through some of the hurdles. So to explain to some of the listeners, when we met, my original interest was talking to you about the business, and then we became friends. But I feel like I've been around through that whole thing, and you had a business partner at some point, and I was there. I'd step in or come in and kind of like talk through some stuff with you guys and kind of help with some consulting and like, comment on the brand and the product line, which I really, I loved doing that. It was so much fun. And so just to see those kind of the behind the scenes workings for you guys and to see how you've grown as a business now, it's just really great. If you feel comfortable, do you mind, briefly touching on you starting a business with a partner and not having that work out, and how that, affected you personally or the business, and how you kind of overcame that?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I have to say, like, thank you. It's been like amazing, like having you be like a part of this journey, because I feel like the support and the reflection and like feedback that you've offered me and, in the realm of this business especially has been like invaluable. So I want to thank you for that and acknowledge that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. And with regard to the business partner question, I mean, it is hard to talk about, and it does still feel like there's pain around it, and yeah, because it's like we were friends, like it was more than just that. So there is that aspect of it. And so I mean, looking back, it's like, it's this amazing like learning experience, you know. It's like you can have lemons or you can turn them into lemonade, and really find the value in going through, you know, pain and sadness and, you know, all those other feelings that come up. Because for me, like, as you're hearing me talk, it's like a very emotional thing. And like, it's basically like what I learned is like, you really need to be clear on like what your expectations are of one another, and yourself. And you need to be sure that you can communicate clearly and that you fully trust one another. And like that you have a similar work ethic. And just because you're friends doesn't necessarily equal like good business partners. But I think that like in much of my life, I'd always been like seeking other people to work with. But I think that through this experience, I've also realized it doesn't have to be in the form of a partnership, you know, like a specifically like a material, like business partnership. It can be through all other kinds of partnerships. Like I feel like we have a partnership, right? Absolutely. So there's other ways, and you know, but if you feel like you have those things with another person, like I say, go for it. Like I've seen many other business partnerships succeed. So I think it just depends on like who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So back to what you said about really communicating and explaining, you know, defining between the two, like your partnership or a partnership in general. Is there any advice you can give that, like, how would you go about doing that without actually experiencing the thing? Because I know you because we talked about this a lot, you tried really, really hard to communicate those things once you were in it and you realized that there was those miscommunications, those misunderstandings. Is there anything up front that you can do to define those things? Or is it kind of like try to define it, wait 3 months, redefine it again, just continue to have the conversation?
I mean, I think that is a great approach to like try. I think it depends on who you are. You know, like if you have a strong awareness of your needs and your preferences and your expectations and you're able to communicate those, then great. So I think beyond just communication, it's like that awareness of like yourself and how you interact with the world and your business and your product and all of that. I'm not necessarily one of those people. Like I don't always like see what's going on until like it happens. I'm like, oh, that's a thing. You know? So I think it depends on who you are. And then also, I think in communication, and especially like when you're so invested in something and really want something to happen so badly, you end up like losing leverage. You end up like losing your values and your just yourself, even when you want something to work so badly that you like give up these other parts. And so I think that I know it's like a little bit out there, but like trusting in the universe and like really listening to your intuition and being like, okay, like, does this feel good? Okay, what about this doesn't feel good? And like sharing that fearlessly and diplomatically, you know, and being kind and, you know, but clear, and being willing to lose and being willing to like not have that partnership anymore, because, you know, who wants to continue being in that place where you feel like you're fighting or like not on the same page and, you know, end up having to separate 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever after that. So yeah, is that clear?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
I mean, the next question I wanted to ask is maybe like, what do you feel like you have sacrificed in this business to make this business happen?
I mean, I think that like in the case of like most of us like maker, like creative entrepreneurs, it's often money. And you can choose to look at that as a sacrifice, or you can choose to look at that as an expense, you know, and be like, this is what it costs to like live the life or work the work that I want to work. And to also know that it gets better, or it can, you know, and that's what I've been experiencing consistently over like the past year and a half. You know, there's like ups and downs, but it seems like on the whole, it's like moving upwards. And then I mean, like, I feel like so resistant to like saying like sacrificing in general, just because it feels like
is there another word you'd use?
Maybe like trading off, because it, like the sacrifice almost like implies like a victim or a martyrdom or something, and it's like maybe it's a little different, and maybe that is sacrifice for some people, but the way that I would look at it would be like a trade-off.
I'm gonna write that down.
Very good. You're welcome.
So it sounds like you work a lot.
I do. Yeah.
What's an average work hours?
Yeah, it totally depends. Like, I mean, there are some weeks, especially when I'm traveling, I'm working like 60, 65, like average. But there are other weeks when I'm working like 35, or like I just went to Hawaii for 10 days. So like,
But how long did that take you to get to a place where you could go to Hawaii for 10 days?
I would say like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then I also like had the opportunity to like travel to all these different places for all these shows that I've been doing. So, and I mean, I can choose to look at that as like, a pain and like, oh, so much travel and it's so hard. Or I can make it fun, you know, and like a business write-off to like go to New York and like have a great dinner and meet some of my friends there. And yeah, I have to work, the time in between, but why not make it fun?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to circle back to, it just popped in my head, like, maybe you can explain some of because part of the point of this podcast is to get down to some really honest aspects of what it really means to be a maker and do this business, this maker entrepreneur thing. So I know that you'd mentioned to me that when you and your partner split, you took Oru and you took the business and you took all the responsibility of the business. So that included some debt. What did you, how did you approach that? And because from my perspective, it seems like you really busted your ass for about a year to get that debt paid off. And now you're in a place where you're like, okay, I can breathe a little bit and think about the next step.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like there wasn't even like a lot of talking through. In the end, it was just kind of like, well, I want to do this and I want to do it. And I was like, okay, like I'll go over here and do this. And I mean, that sounds like not a power position, but it was it was just kind of like feeling through it, and trying to see what was right, because there were like kind of like some complications and like what happened through that split. Not just the, like taking on the debt piece and, kind of carrying on with this one particular line, but the fact that like the other line, which was intended to be something else, became something that was more similar to Oru. And so because we didn't have any like agreements made up, and it was a murky area. Like I can see how it was a murky area. For me it wasn't, but I can see that. It was just like feeling through it, and then like seeing what would happen, because I wasn't sure like where she was going to go with it. I felt like I was pretty clearly on a certain path, and so there was a lot of unknown. And I feel like, it seems like it's kind of, coming to an end in a way, like, kind of like moving through it. But again, like it's still kind of unknown. So I don't know, like, right. Do you want to like...
I just feel like from my perspective, in that time, there was a lot of anxiety around that, and a lot of, like you said, a lot of uncertainty. But from my perspective, you really hunkered down and were like, okay, I've got this debt I've got to pay off, and I'm going to bust through it and move on. And I feel like, do you feel like you're coming out? From my perspective, you're on the other side of that now.
Yeah.
And it's, you're now, the debt's paid off, business is moving, you're reevaluating. We had a conversation about you reevaluating, like, what does your brand really mean, and who are you really? So maybe we can talk about what you're discovering now. Like, what are these, through this experience, like, how has this changed your self-awareness around you? How has your business changed you personally, and how do you see your business, and how are you separating the two?
I feel like in some ways it's like made me feel like more fierce. and more protective of like the value that I hold and the skills that I have, and just what I can bring to the table. So like in a way, like it's totally like challenged my confidence, you know, and in another, it's like forced me to like move through that and rise up and be like, this is what I want to do, you know, and like really fight for it and like really, you know, like pay that debt off and work and do all these things to like get to this point. And not to say that I'm anywhere near being arrived anywhere, but you're right. And it's good to like look at the success of that, you know, of having moved through that particular piece.
Do you feel like this process has helped you personally define your values? Are you defining those separately from the brand? Or are they one and the same? Are they intertwined somehow?
I mean, that's an interesting question, like defining my values. 'Cause that kind of...
Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but maybe what have you learned about, you know, what you want your business to be?
Yeah.
And because for me, in my process with Church Key and these other things that I've gone through, it's like I realize how much it does take out of you when you put so much, like you said earlier, when you put so much into a business. So that's forced me to look back at myself and kind of a mirror and be like, oh, okay, who am I? Let's redefine these a little bit more. I understand them. I can see them a little bit more. So maybe just speak to, through the process you've gone through, how are you looking at your business and your brand right now? Mm-hmm. And how might that have changed from the past, or how has it evolved?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I'm just thinking like what the best way to answer that would be.
Yeah, I just to explain to the listeners, I gave Agnieszka a bunch of questions, and we're kind of going off topic here, so I'm maybe catching you a little off guard. But that's how conversations go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I don't know if it's like as like cut and dry as that, and I wish I could like give you like a specific like, this is what I've learned, like this is how the like company has changed through that process. Because like, to be honest, like that past year, like I was working so hard and, you know, almost like chasing my tail to like get it, you know, taken care of.
But where are you at now? Like,
yeah,
like you're changing the designs.
Like I'm just in that process of like taking a look at that and being like, what does Oru mean for me? Like, what do I want it to be? And like something that I see in like branding, especially in like lifestyle branding a lot, is like people are defining like who the customer is like very clearly. Like, this is who you are and this is what you want. And like, while part of me like loves that and like loves falling into that world, there's a part of me that feels like really critical of it because it feels manufactured. And so it's like, how do you create a business that's like an authentic expression, you know, that people can relate to on their own terms? So like, to me, like I have like so many different like interests in like style and design and fashion and like all this stuff, and they don't align. And so I'm like, I don't know. And like my customers are like this broad range of ages and people from like different backgrounds. And like, yes, like a large part of them do have like an interest in design or like architecture, like something along those lines. There's a lot that don't. And so like, I'm still like stuck in this place of like wanting to appeal to like everybody, but like in the way that they want to take it. And I know that still feels like very broad, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. Yeah.
The way I like to think about it is it's like a drop in the water. So if you define really clearly who your ideal customer is, their name, their age, their profession, all those things. It's hard to do because you do want to sell to everybody. But you take that distilled client, let's say, customer, and you put it in a dropper and you drop it in a bowl of water. Each ripple is going to be less of that pure thing. So you're speaking to an individual, but then the next ring out is 90% of that individual, and the next ring out is 80%. But you're still speaking to that customer on some level. So they're still connecting with it, but it's on their own terms. So that's the kind of way I've been thinking about it lately. I don't know if that helps at all or not, but it maybe helps to have a starting point. Mm-hmm. And you can have multiple like definitions of your customer too, and different kind of like, oh, this is Susie's over here and she is 23 and she's just starting at the design agency. She just got out of school, blah blah blah. This is Martha and she's 32 and she's, I don't know, making shit. But so it can be a little bit more broad. But I'm glad to see you going through that and trying to figure that out. That's great. What made you? Where did you get to that point? How did you get to that point where you decided that was an important thing to start focusing on and learn about?
You specifically the branding?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been creeping up on me like this whole time, because I think that when I was like running that like raw vegan food company, like I really had no awareness of that. I was just like running on like pure passion and like ideals. Mm-hmm. And not to say that I still don't have those things. They're just they've shifted and they've been toned a little bit. And I think that like this process of like getting to know this company, getting to know like what I design, and like paying attention to like what's out there in the world and like how it's being presented. I mean, like if you look at like Instagram, right? Mm-hmm. Then you see this it's almost like a little like formulaic. Like you see like a particular brand having like this very like specific, like refined like color palette, subject matter, like voice, whatever it is, and like that just kind of starts to like, you're like, okay, this is what this person is about, this is what this person is about, or this company or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe like my resistance to like being like, okay, this is what this company is about, is like because I still feel so like personally tied into it. And so the more I start like separating myself like personally from the company, maybe I can start like defining what the company is. But like I was saying earlier, I'm always like, what if there's another way? Like, what if there's something else out there that will feel and ring true, is like more authentic? And like that, even saying that word right now, like I know it's like that's like a word that's being bandied about these days.
Yeah.
Everybody's like seeking authenticity, so it almost like feels like weird to say that. But I mean, it's like what we're all seeking. It's where we find connection. That's the way there. And it like, while I realize that like I'm selling a product, it's to be able to continue like making and creating and like expressing. So
do you feel like, so the beginning process of this for you, I think, was sitting down and figuring out what the jewelry needed to be like, what it needed to look like. A lot of the conversations we had were like, this color and these beads and this, this metal piece wrapped, the beads wrapped around this metal piece and that sort of a thing. And I was always like, less, mm-hmm. and you guys making more and more and more. Mm-hmm. I feel like you're getting through that process and you're getting that honed down and you know what you want to do, and your new line looks amazing. It's really going in a really great direction that I think is telling a great story, and you're figuring that thing out. And you're figuring out the Instagram looks great too. You're figuring out your photography and how that looks, and you're getting your displays down, and you've done a bunch of trade shows and you kind of got that down. So I feel like, I guess the question I want to ask is like, okay, got these basic things down, and then now you're like, oh, there's this other thing that I see has value and maybe I should pay attention to it. Is that kind of like, there's like the practical things I've got to do on the mm-hmm. ground, day to day, basic stuff, and now I can kind of like step back a little bit more that I understand those, because it's overwhelming to do it all?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And I think that like the way that I remember it, which my memories are always a little funky, but the way they remember like it is like all of those pieces like constantly like flowing together. So like you're working on the display, you're working on like the jewelry design over here, you're working on like Instagram over there, and you're constantly like hopping from place to place and like slowly like kind of like up the spiral, like slowly like improving all of those pieces. Because like I'm never gonna say that like my design is like totally honed in. Like I'm always gonna be improving, just like with the display, just like with like the social media and all of that. So,
but it's not new anymore. You've got a handle on it a little bit more. You know how your process works.
Totally. Like I have more experience like going to these shows and like seeing like all these different like tips and tricks of the trade to like, you know, make these systems more aesthetically pleasing and efficient.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's get back to the list of questions here, maybe. So I guess sort of the trade-offs thing, back to that a little bit. While you have personal trade-offs, do you feel like there have been other people in your life have taken trade-offs or have made sacrifices for you to, or like, do you not hang out with your boyfriend as often as you want to? Your friends, your family, what sacrifices or trade-offs do you feel like you've made in that area? Just touch on that briefly. I'm just curious.
Yeah, totally.
How have they helped you get to where you're at now? Yeah,
I feel super lucky because I'm currently like dating somebody who has his own business and who really like relates to me on a like, you know, obviously on a lot of personal levels, but like on the business level as well, where like he's really dedicated to what he does and he appreciates and understands like my own dedication to this company that I'm working on. So like there are times like when I'm especially like traveling, when I'm sure it's like not really like easy for either one of us. We're like, Jesus, like another weekend gone type of thing. But like there's a lot of like understanding there. So like, yeah, there is that trade-off of like time spent, but I also get to spend a lot of time with him and like our housemates. Otherwise, like we eat dinner together, I would say, like with housemates probably like 2 or 3 times a week, and then every other night, you know, Zach and I are eating together. So that's really important, like that breaking bread piece. We have the same like hours, you know, we go to bed at the same time, we wake up at the same time. So that's great. You know, in the past I've had experiences where like that's not real. So yeah, that seems to flow really well. And then my friends are all like really amazing and supportive and understanding to the point where they even visit me in my studio some days.
It's true.
Like this guy over here. So, you know, there's a lot of that going on, and it feels like the community that I get to be surrounded by like really gets it and supports it. So it's pretty awesome.
That's great. So, perfect size of your business. Where do you see that at? Okay.
So that's like another one of those where I'm like, that's like tough to quantify because it's always like changing.
So I guess 5-10 years from now, like, where do you see? Is it always growing? Does it get to a certain spot where you're like a couple employees? I can work 20 hours a week and trust somebody else to take care of it, and or what?
I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know. Like, I don't have a vision for that. Like, it's really for me about like watching the things unfold. Like right now I can tell you that like I really would like to like have somebody helping me with metal, and I would like to have another person helping me with the beads, you know, so that can free up more time to work on maybe this branding piece or, you know, business development in other ways, you know, sales, whatever is required at that time. And there's another piece of me like resisting that a little bit. That's like, you're a maker. And it's like this weird, awkward stage of like moving from maker maybe a little bit more into like the designer hat, and, you know, more of like, like the creative entrepreneur hat. So, I mean, gosh, I know I want a bigger studio, you know, like and even down the line, I would love to own a storefront, you know, where I carry my own work, other people's work, you know, the usual like Portland indie shop. There's like 100 of them now, but you know, that I do have that vision. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I don't know where it's going to be, but I know that like in my heart, like that's what I would really like. And whether or not I get that, you know, isn't entirely up to me. Like maybe we're at the brink of a recession right now, and like that's going to be made 10 times harder. Or, you know, maybe there's going to be a magical place that opens up like in 6 months, and I'm going to be so ready, and I'm going to hop right into it, and it'll be way less than 5 years. So
you just mentioned your studio. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about it.
It's adorable.
It's pretty cute.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy because like I was in a studio building originally.
The good old town storage building.
Yeah, town storage. So I had...
May it rest in peace.
Lisai. Yeah, 4th floor, south-facing windows, you know, like 16-foot ceilings, exposed brick, giant windows, like view of the waterfront, southeast or southwest, like just insane, you know. And like, yeah, I was like falling apart a little bit, and I always joke that like, you know, don't look for me if there's an earthquake type of thing. But
yes.
It was home, and like I met you, and I met like so many other amazing people. Syntax, whoa, tough for me some days. At any rate, so, you know, as anybody listening may have heard, it was sold to a California developer, and all of its inhabitants were evicted in October of 2015 last year.
But, and everybody, it's funny because everybody's like, oh, it's changing so much, and people are getting kicked out, and none of these artists have anywhere to go, and just like, at the same time, building owners weren't taking great care of the building. It would have been destroyed in an earthquake, and we all would have died in that earthquake. So safety first, folks. And it's going to be preserved. It's historical, so they have to preserve it. It'll be a beautiful building, and it deserves little TLC. So
yeah, totally.
So tell us about your current studio.
Yeah,
you downsized a little bit. Shrunk
a
it
little bit. Same price, 90 square feet now. So like a little bit less than a third of the size. And so, you know, at first, I mean, I'll be honest, like I went in and I just like cried. I was like, how am I going to do this? But then I like busted out my measuring tape and started taking measurements and like jigsawing, you know, playing Tetris with everything, and, you know, finding a way to make the things that I needed fit and removing the rest. And it was actually like this amazing, you know, contraction that happened where everything, you know, that I didn't need and wasn't using went away. And all the things that I use are like now in there within arm's reach. So I can basically spin my chair around and like I'm at my soldering bench or at like my actual like, you know, bench pin, or I'm at like a beading surface or in an office like space, like, you know, computer surface or whatever. And it's just, you know, everything's very vertical, but I still have a big window, so I can still have all of my plants.
Lots of great light.
Yeah, and all the light. And, you know, it's a slightly different environment. I wouldn't say that it's as like everybody's going to chat in the hallway type of space, but it's good. It gives me more time to like really, you know, bust it out. So it's funny, like at first, like feeling so like frustrated and like almost to the point of like, I think I'm being taken advantage of, you know, to being like, you know what, I'm enjoying this experience, and I know it's not going to be forever, and maybe it'll be another 6 months, maybe it'll be a year or two, but it's not going to be forever. And like, I'm going to enjoy it for what it is. And it's also informed, like if I were to move into like a brick and mortar or anything like that, I know exactly how much space I need, you know, or I know exactly how much space 2 people would need, or 3 people, just depending on the processes and everything involved in the production. So it's been pretty amazing.
Yeah, it sounds pretty informative. You learned a lot.
Yeah.
Lots of learning in these maker entrepreneur businesses here. Lots of learning.
Well, I mean, like if the learning stops, you might as well.
Yeah, roll over.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, it's not like a rolling pace of learning. It's like intense learning, like throw in with the sharks and figure it out, sort of a thing. Not the best analogy, but you get the idea.
I do. No, I think it's actually pretty good.
Yeah? Is it? All right.
Like some days I'm like, I can feel that. But I mean, like, would you have it any other way? You know?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe.
I kind of love it. You know, like I love the rush. I love the do or die. You know, it's like, we have this like hero's journey, you know, like full of all these challenges and dragons and sharks and whatever along the way. We have the dark night of the soul, you know, at least like once a month, like, why am I doing this? type of thing, and you have to like push through, and you have to like connect to the purpose, like connect to the reason why you're doing it, and like move forward.
Yeah, I feel like entrepreneurial ventures, especially this maker thing, I think a lot of the podcasts I listen to, a lot of surrounding this topic, there's always a spiritual aspect to it, or a self-awareness or emotional awareness that kind of comes up, because you get in this, you're by yourself, maybe with a partner if you're lucky, and you got to figure some stuff out. Like, is this worth it to me? Do I want to do this? Like, and you put so much of yourself into it, you're really giving up a lot of your own energy and things. So I'm really fascinated with that conversation happening around it, and I'm excited to see where it all goes, and the learning that people will have personally through these ventures they're taking, because you have to be a certain type of person on some levels to step out and make that jump and make that leap. Are you happy you did this?
Hell yes.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy that the universe did this, because like I said, there was that moment where
Well, you started taking those steps, and then it kind of like pushed you from behind.
Yeah.
Into
It's
Shark Tank.
like super hard to like take credit for it, because I'm like, I don't know if I would have been able to do it like by myself, but
you got you got in the studio. You had the intent. You'd set the intention of starting a jewelry company, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah. So I'm always curious about some practical aspects of this sort of thing, this business thing. And one of the questions I like to ask is your income, your sales. Give us a sense of like percentage, or of how much you make from retail, how much you make from online, trade shows, and like how much do you make at the holidays? Because the way I understand it, usually that's about 40%.
40 to 50, I would say, just depending on like how many shows you're doing. It's huge, but I mean, it's also like exhausting if you're traveling like 6 weekends in November and December, and holiday.
Why are you traveling?
You're traveling to go to like craft fairs, basically, like predominantly the Renegades, which have been awesome, but we also have a local one here, Crafty Wonderland. There's one in Seattle, Urban Craft Uprising. There's West Coast Craft in San Francisco.
So these trade shows happen in this time because of the holiday season happening. It's gift sort of.
And just to be clear, those are retail shows, because the trade shows are for the wholesale. Trade. So it's buyers from shops.
Got it.
And those generally happen like twice a year, January, February, and then like August, September. And I also do those. It's still pretty new. My first one was in August of last year in Las Vegas, and I did Las Vegas again in February, and like every time it's improving. But to answer the question with regard to the percentages, I would say that like currently 10% is about retail. And because like there was no time to like build up a retail following, it was just kind of like go, and like the best way, most clear, direct way to bring income in was to go directly to shops. So it's been kind of like, you're developing your wholesale clients concurrently with developing the retail clients. So, and that's been consistently growing, which is really exciting.
And what's the difference between wholesale and retail clients? So just want to jump in here real quick and clarify a few things that got a little confusing in our conversation. Direct to customer, which equals both online and craft fairs or retail fairs, where Agnieszka is actually traveling to these shows. Online is 10%, and the retail shows are 50%. Wholesale, where she's selling to brick and mortar, is 40% of her business, and then holidays overall is, like she said, 40 to 50% of her business year round. That should clarify things, I think, a little bit. Let's get back to the conversation. My next question was explain a little bit about your holiday schedule, because I know it's so crazy. Tell us when it starts. Like
right now, like some of the shows are starting before Thanksgiving. But
when do you start preparing?
Yeah.
That was something I was fascinated by when I talked to people about this.
I mean, like, okay, so if you look at the wholesale trade show calendar, like the trade shows start happening August and September. So basically, if you're doing like 2 collections a year, you're releasing your second collection at that time. So you need to be like designing, producing, like prototyping, wearing, shooting, graphic designing, like this whole new collection sometime in like June or July. So then you can put it out in August to show to all your wholesale buyers who are buying for the holiday.
Got it.
So while that's happening, so they're putting in their orders, and depending on like your company, the turnaround time, it could be like 4 to 12 weeks, let's say. That's a broad range. You're normally, like, I think most people give something more specific. Like I say generally like 4 to 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks, just depending. And then, so, okay, so you made it through August and September, right around October, generally by Thanksgiving, you need to be shipping all of those orders. And then also at the same time, you need to be preparing your stock for all of the holiday craft shows, the retail shows. So again, those start before Thanksgiving, probably 2 weeks before like that, awful weekend that happens right after Thanksgiving, like Black Friday.
Oh, right.
All those things.
Shopping thing. Yeah.
That thing.
Cyber Monday.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then it all starts. So it's basically, like, if you really want to go for it, in jewelry specifically, in my particular price point, you can go to a show, like, every weekend, starting 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, all the way up until, like, the weekend right before Christmas. So you can say goodbye to holiday parties for that year.
Yeah, pretty intense.
Yeah, it is. And, like, it's fun, it has that, but I feel like this past holiday, I made a decision not to go to Chicago when I went there last year. I went to like LA instead because it was closer, shorter flight, and like trying to make better decisions for myself and for my partner. And so we'll see. I'm not sure what's going to happen this holiday.
Your boyfriend.
My boyfriend.
Yeah. Yeah, to clarify. Just because we were talking about business partner earlier, so just to clarify out there for the folks. What's been the hardest part of this business? Like, is there one thing that stands out, or is it all kind of just like we said, it's just a constant figuring it out?
Like, one of the hardest parts in this particular business was like going through that like separation with my ex-business partner. That was like very hard. But apart from that, I would say like dealing with like the casting companies. And Beth, if you're listening to me, I love you. Don't get me wrong. But
was that a learning curve on your end, or both, or?
I think mostly on mine, just getting a feel for like the rhythm of how things work, and like it's super not perfect, and like there's a lot of like following up and QC, and like just it's always like this push and pull and like balance of like, this needs to be, better quality, or like this needs to be here at this time or whatever. And it's like, but at the same time, it's like there's unforeseen things that happen, especially in casting. So it's a dance.
So just real quick, I want to jump in here again and explain exactly what Agnieszka's doing. She's taking her woven beads and casting them in precious metals. It's a really brilliant way to extend her product line and provide more options for her customers. To catch you up to speed as to where we're at in the conversation, Agnieszka's about to explain how she went about getting a product from prototype to market.
It's hard to say. It was a process because like we actually ended up like getting our first cast pieces with like a random friend that I ran into that didn't even really have like a casting shop. He was just kind of like working with his father, and like we were both like just trying to figure out. We were basically like looking for prototypes.
You were just testing at that point.
Yeah, totally.
Like, is this even possible?
Yeah, and so it worked, but like he was kind of like off traveling and doing his own thing and whatever. So like we needed somebody more consistent, and so we found somebody more consistent, and then. But the pricing was like a little bit off, so then it was like, okay, maybe like go to New York, and like there's a ton of casting companies there, like maybe there's somebody there that we can work with. And so we found somebody there, and then that's been going like fairly well, but again, there's like people, like they have strengths and weaknesses, and at the same time I also really wanted to work with a company in Portland. So I reached out to another one that we had done some prototypes with beforehand, and that's been going great. I'm really happy with it. And then still doing like some of the work in New York. And I mean, like, I don't know, that was at least like 6 months of like figuring it out. But I feel like it's still being worked out to see like where the strengths are of like, you know, each manufacturer basically, and like, you know, and not just in the quality but in the level of communication and willingness to like really troubleshoot some stuff with you, because as it turns out, a lot of the things that I design are like a pain in the ass to cast. So like
small and intricate. Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, you know, it just takes like a little bit of extra work. And also, to be clear, like it's not just the woven beads that are being molded and cast. It's also like the frames for the actual beaded pieces that are being cast. And there is some fabrication that goes into it. And, you know, we still like, you know, solder jump rings and posts and all of that. But yeah, there is like casting is like a large element, production element in the pieces.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you got through that, because again, like I said, the line looks great, and you're really elevating it and taking it to fun and new and interesting ways or places.
Thank you.
I guess the question we haven't touched on is kind of the center of your company. Tell us about the weaving process. Like, where did you come up with this, and where did you find it, and how, kind of maybe what point did you see like, oh, I could apply this to jewelry, and also explain how intricate and detailed it is, maybe a little bit.
Well,
where the beads come from.
It all started
one dark and stormy night.
No, when I was like 8, I went into my first bead store. And I like had $20 in my pocket, which when you're 8 in like the 80s is like, it's a ton of money. And I like blew it all. I was like, this is amazing. And it was just like a handful of beads, and I was like hooked, you know. And then, so, you know, I was like doing beading stuff, but didn't really know any like actual techniques. And so when I was 12, I took my first like weaving class or beading class at like a little shop in the city where I grew up. And it was, you know, peyote stitch. It was a round peyote stitch, so it's a little different and more challenging actually than what I'm using now in the work, but it's the same idea. It's like basically sideways brick building, where you're weaving the beads not on a loom, which is what you commonly see, which is much faster. It's you pick up one bead, you weave it in, you pick up another bead, you weave it in. So it's like, some people would call it tedious. I call it meditative.
Nice.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't love it. And I mean, like throughout my life, it's been something that I've gone to like just to relax. Like some people knit, some people read. I did bead weaving. Like I remember when I was living in France, like I was just like, I think it was like a vacation, and like I couldn't go home, and I literally like spent like 3 days, like 10 hours a day, just like bead weaving like this giant cuff bracelet that's maybe like 3 inches wide and, you know, like 7 inches long. Crazy person, but it was like, I loved it. It made me so happy.
I had no idea you were doing it for this long.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was so integrated into your past and like who you are. That's great.
It's part of my DNA.
It is now.
At this point.
You have woven it into your DNA.
Indeed, touche. So, yeah, and then, you know, I started doing, like, picking it up and, like, trying to sell, like, more kind of, like, production style pieces when I was living in a like apartment building where I couldn't have a torch. Like we couldn't even burn candles in there. So it was just like cold connections and bead weaving. And so I was like doing like geometric shapes, like bright colors and things like that. And then it was like working with metal shapes, and we ended up like combining the two. And so that happened like through a partnership. And then I taught her how to weave the beads, and it kind of moved forward into like being the heart and soul of Oru.
Yeah. That's great. Let's do a little rapid fire questions.
Here we go.
Does that work? Biggest time saver that you found in your creating yourself and discover?
You're going to laugh, but it's like packaging process. Like using a padded envelope, printing the label. Like I was doing like this ass backwards way of like shipping. So that's been like an immense time saver, and much less time with like the tape gun.
Nice.
Yeah. I know. I wish I could give you something more.
No, that's great.
Elevated.
That's practical. Like that's practical. That's the stuff we need. It's all about the little things. How do you save your ideas and brainstorms? Notebook, digital?
Yeah, tiny notebooks. In case you haven't picked up on it, I'm obsessed with tiny. So just tiny pens, tiny notebooks. And then and that's mostly for like sketching ideas and things, or sketching visual ideas, right? And then like things that I need to keep track of that aren't design ideas. I actually have like a little notes thing on my phone.
Little scout books or
yeah, totally.
Field notes sort of things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Moleskins. What's your favorite thing about your studio?
The size. It's kind of crazy. It's like a love-hate thing.
Speaking of tiny, wow.
Yeah, no, because like we talked about before, like it forced me into like a new system, basically, and a new way of thinking and like a different form of efficiency. So, yeah.
So we kind of already touched on this, but just to recap real quick, because it's on the question list. How long have you been in your current space, and how many times have you moved?
I have been there for almost 6 months now, and it has been my only move since Town Storage.
Got it. And how long were you at Town Storage?
Like a year and a half.
Okay.
A little over that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm in a doctor's office.
Okay.
No cough.
So we already went over that one. And we kind of already went over this, but maybe you can recap. As a product-based company, how important is building a brand and telling your story?
I think telling the story is everything.
What story are you currently trying to tell?
I mean, it's a story about like the weaving. I think currently it's a story about process. So it's really product oriented. And then beyond that, that's kind of like where I'm
working on.
Yep.
Fair enough. When was the last time you were selfish?
All the time.
And by selfish, I mean taking time for yourself.
I don't know. Like, I think I got my nails done last week.
Nice.
That's always a nice one when I got to go out of town. So I'm not on the bench and not rubbing my nails on all the steel objects.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Well, and you went to Hawaii for 10 days.
Yeah, there is that.
So there's that. So if you knew then what you know now, would you have started the business?
Probably not.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah. I mean, like, I wish I could say otherwise, but at the same time, like, do I regret it? Like, no, absolutely not. I'm so happy I'm where I'm at.
So, as far as you've done this thing, you're in this place, in your journey, is there something that you wish you had, like, starting out? Like, whether it's a resource or a piece of knowledge or some sort of product that would have helped you, make it through a little easier, made your day-to-day a little easier, or the overall?
I mean, in some ways, like, I can rattle off a list, I think, of, like, a million things that I wish I had had. But it would be, like, then I'd be maybe, like, higher up or further along or whatever, but still in the same place, like, still, like, wanting to move forward and, like, grow, and, like, that doesn't change. So even those moments when, like, I didn't listen to my intuition have been, like, such incredible learning experiences for, like, why the intuition is important, like, why it's there. And so, like, the lessons, that I've gone through, the challenges that I've gone through and currently experiencing, like have all this value, because when I move through them, when I'm out of this gateway, then I will have something of value to, like, look back on and be like, this is what I'm taking with me from that. And, like, I can see how that's kind of like an annoying answer, like, that's kind of like very, like, seeing the world through like a particular view, but like that's where I want to be, you know, like that's where I want to like the view from the way that I want to see the world, you know. And so the more I connect to that, like the more I see it, you know. It's like a feedback loop.
It's experience. You just kind of have to experience it. Just kind of got to go through it.
Yeah, because it's like, what's the fun of like being where you are and being like, oh man, I wish I had what that person had. You know, like we all do it. Like I do it. Like, you know, I'm not going to pretend I don't, but like it's a lot more fun to like be in your experience and be like, look at all this value everywhere. Like, look at this conversation that we get to have. Look at this like amazing friend I get to have. You know, so you can look at it however you want to, and I'm not saying that like one way is better. I'm just saying that one way is better for me, and that's the one. And
that's important to know, the difference between that.
Totally.
And that comes back to that awareness piece, that being able to communicate what you want and where you're at. I feel like you have, through your experience of this business and, you know, working to better communicate with your business partner and all those things, like you've really gotten to a place where you're better able to communicate what you want. And I think in our conversations that I've learned. So
that's amazing to hear. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's awesome to see some growth in somebody. You know, it's good. So.
Well, I have all the amazing people around me to thank. So. Yeah. You're one of them.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks for sitting down and knocking episode 1 out.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thanks.
There you have it, episode 1. Thanks so much for joining us. It's the first of many conversations, I'm sure. If you enjoyed this episode, there's a good chance you'll like the rest of them. Episode 2 is available now at workundone.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for the mailing list, where I will be letting everybody know when our next episodes come out and other goodies I've got in store. And be sure to pop over to iTunes and subscribe. That helps this project out a lot. And when you're checking out Agnieszka's amazing jewelry at loveoru.com, be sure to use the coupon code WORKONDONE, all one word, at checkout for a 15% discount. And as always, thanks for listening. I appreciate your support.